Hey, everybody who's joined so far, we'll get started right at 5. Everybody who's joined, we'll get started right at 5 o'clock.
All right, my clock says 5 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Ted Pitts, President and CEO of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, and it's an honor today, this afternoon, to get to give you an overview of the commercial real estate market here in South Carolina. And to present that, we have 3 subject matter experts from across the state. We have Peter Fennelly, who's with Bridge Commercial in Charleston. We've got Steve Smith with CBRE. They have offices across the state and in Greenville, the Midlands here in Columbia, and then in Charleston. And then David Lockwood, who's with Colliers International, who also has offices across those 3 markets in the state. So with that, I'm going to open it up and I'm going to introduce each one of them and let them tell you a little bit about who they are, what they do, what they specialize in, and then we're going to get into the heart of the conversation. So Peter, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Peter Fennelly, President of Bridge Commercial. We're a commercial real estate firm, and we focus our efforts on helping corporations, facilitate either acquiring properties or disposing of properties throughout the region. We also help a lot of our clients who are owners of commercial real estate, whether it's large-scale office buildings or industrial buildings. We help facilitate that process of, finding tenants for them or finding sites to help develop and move through the cycle. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Steve Smith, we'll go to you next.
All right, Steve Smith. I'm with CBRE. I'm the market leader for South Carolina. We've got offices in Charleston, Columbia, and Greenville. We handle brokerage, property management, project management, and valuation out of those offices.
Thank you, Steve. David Lockwood, who is probably about 5 floors below me here in Columbia. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, Ted. Thank you for having us. David Lockwood. I've been in commercial real estate with Colliers International for 33 years. I'm Chief Operating Officer for South Carolina for Colliers, and most importantly for this call, market leader for our operations in Columbia. We are full service brokerage, property management with construction administration division. We do all the different food groups, including investment, hotel, land, office, industrial, retail, and a couple of other things. So really glad to be with you today.
Well, good deal. Thank you, gentlemen. So we'll get started. Sarah, if you'll pull up the slide. Let Sarah maximize the slide deck for us, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, hopefully, Peter, you don't have any deals on that inbox.
Maybe.
Okay, you should be able to see the screen now and the full.
No, we still see your email. Still see your email inbox.
Hold on. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, just to improvise here. Peter Fennelly, Steve Smith, and I had discussed this in advance and thought what we would do is we would talk about each of the property types and go through the property types first rather than just all over the board. So we're going to talk about an industrial market throughout South Carolina in each of these individual markets, and then we'll get to retail and office as well. So
Good.
Peter, I think you'll lead off.
Sure.
Yeah, good deal. Sarah, yeah, if you'll go to the next slide, I think, and then we can.
Yeah.
Oh, there it goes. Okay, Peter.
Okay. So in the Lowcountry, so the industrial market, we speak a lot about pre-COVID, post-COVID, COVID as we're doing this. In the first quarter of 2020, it was great. Everything was normal. We were great absorption, super activity, the port's humming, everything's great. Once that happened, things started to change, but we were still one of the food groups, which is industrial being the first one we're talking about, was actually able in our market to continue to do transactions. We were able to secure a number of short-term lease transactions in the market because there was product on the water, on the big ships coming across, and people had to take it for the manufacturers or for the distributors. So we were able to still achieve the process of getting leases secured and signed and fill buildings up during the period of the second quarter, which is the COVID period. And that has been fortunate for us because it helped us out carrying some of our other divisions. At this point in time, we're actually having a real surge of activity, and we're seeing activity coming from some manufacturers coming from other places in the country, but really a lot of distribution has come to our market from different parts of the country. We're seeing a push in from the Northeast states and even some from California. So it's been very positive for industrial. I'll pass it off to Steve or David.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, thank you. So, all three of us agreed that the industrial market was probably the most robust market of all the different product types out there. And that was pre-COVID. South Carolina was experiencing a lot of new development, and even in the Midlands, which is typically a more conservative market, we had seen new construction taking place. We had seen market rents increasing. We were seeing really good activity. We were also seeing very good economic development activity taking place with a lot of really good larger prospects looking at the region. Then COVID-19 hit, and everyone would ask the question, well, did industrial shut down? Actually, industrial accelerated during that period because of all of the demands that were coming from healthcare, the logistics involved in healthcare, plus food distribution. Our industrial team saw just an absolute fast increase in the demand that's out there, plus the demand that was already taking place. So I think if you ask any industrial broker today in the state, in any of these offices that we're talking about, they will tell you that their outlook for the foreseeable future, which would be 1 year to 2 years, they're seeing a really, really positive, robust pipeline. Plus, we are starting to hear about and actually seeing some of the efforts of a lot of major manufacturers who are worldwide who are going to be placing manufacturing plants back in the U.S. And the really good logical spot is Southeast United States and South Carolina with its really pro-business climate and strong economic development. We think South Carolina will be a huge beneficiary of the continued onshoring, but really a new wave of onshoring as a lot of the worldwide manufacturers look to place multiple plants around the globe, but specifically we think that there'll be really good activity in South Carolina. So all of the industrial teams are really, really positive about the activity that they're seeing now and for the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I would just echo, and first I wanted to say thanks to Ted and Sonny and Sarah and the staff at South Carolina Chamber. You guys do a great job of advocating for South Carolina and advocating for business in South Carolina. So we appreciate the partnership. Couldn't do it without you. And really keeping us up to snuff, so to speak, in the last couple months as we've been enduring this pandemic. You guys have been great to kind of give us the 3 things we need to know and probably 3 things we didn't need to know. So we appreciate all you've done in that regard and keeping us in check. The other thing I would say too is from an economic standpoint, and I think everybody on this call will agree that, you know, we had an economy that was probably as good as it can get before pre-COVID. You know, we had record unemployment, we had record employment, we had, you know, record job growth, just, you know, everything was, you know, all the economic indicators were just off the chart, so to speak. You know, and banks were flush with cash, you know, unlike the 08-09 recession. This was not a real estate crisis. This was a health crisis that turned into a real estate, not crisis, but, you know, it affected all, you know, all the markets. But anyway, so, you know, in around mid-March, we were all told to basically cut the engine off and, you know, retreat. And that felt kind of weird and felt kind of strange, but we all were, you know, somewhat compliant. So we did that. And so when you look at the upstate of South Carolina from an industrial standpoint, I'll echo what Peter and David both said. You know, the industrial market before the COVID crisis, during the COVID crisis, and after the COVID crisis is going to lead us without question. And we're seeing, you know, indicators of that as well in the upstate. You know, finished first quarter with 1.9 million square feet absorbed. Again, that was a record rental rates, record low vacancy. You know, in the upstate, there's over 7 million square feet of spec delivered or under construction. You know, for years we were asking people to develop and, you know, spec in Greenville and nobody would do it. And when they finally did it, you know, they did it in a big way. You know, and some of that space is getting absorbed. You know, pre-COVID, the inland port was doing better than expected. You know, it's been hitting record numbers every year. You know, part of that 7 million square feet, you know, Spartanburg County is leading the way with about almost 3 million square feet under construction. But Greenville County will have something to say about that. And you'll learn about that in another slide.
Yeah, hey, and Peter and Stephen, you know, the one word that we did not mention and probably merits mentioning is e-commerce. And there was already a strong surge on e-commerce, but from all of the consumers out there who know what they or their spouses have ordered over the last 12 weeks to be delivered to their house, we know that the whole e-commerce boom is going to accelerate and affect all three of our markets, or all through South Carolina. I think Peter and Steve probably would agree with that.
I agree.
Oh, absolutely.
Every time I get home and if it's dark out, I'm afraid I'm going to trip over an Amazon.
Yeah, I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think the e-commerce, retail was, transitioning, trying to figure out what bricks and mortar retail was looking like in the future. And I'm here to say that, at least from my standpoint, bricks and mortar retail is here to stay. It's going to look different. There's going to be different kind of users and how they use their space, going forward. But I think we would all agree that, people want a real retail experience when they go shopping. They don't just want to stay home and wait for, a package to get dropped at the door. So I think we'll see, more transition and, different uses going forward.
Let me ask one question, across the three markets, if you focus in your market, the new spec buildings, what you see on I-26 going to Charleston, or you see on 385, going to Greenville, or here over in Lexington County, David, what's the rental rate? What's the ask rate, triple net rate that folks are looking at in the three markets, so folks can get a comparative analysis? Peter, I'll start with you.
Sure. In the bigger boxes, and you see some of the really large buildings from 300 to 700,000 feet, you're in the mid to high $4 a foot range, so 450, 465 is in those range for the bigger buildings. But as you break those components down, the rental rates in our market are moving up to 5s and 6s until you get smaller components in 7 and 8. So we've seen over time, inflation of pricing move up, but inflation and pricing is not indicative of just a need to raise pricing. It's actually truly the cost of all things, the cost of land, the cost of entitlements, the cost of construction, all those elements. So, the reality is, as we are building more product throughout the whole state, there is a cost of building this in the real scheme of the country, but it's still relatively very affordable compared to some of these other markets throughout the United States, whether you're looking at Northeast or California or different markets. We're in South Carolina. We are a very reasonable place, not only a reasonable place to do business, great place to do business, but a very reasonably affordable place to do business.
Yeah, Peter, I'll follow that. So 72 million total square feet of industrial space throughout central South Carolina. Average rents that we track through our market research is $432 a square foot. That's healthy, considering all the classifications of buildings. And that number is up 11% over a year ago. So we saw rapid rent increase because of the demand. But Peter's right, the newer space, the big bulk space, is priced a little bit higher. Those higher cube bulk distribution centers are going to range 450, 460, 465 a square foot. Still very affordable compared to other areas of the country.
Yeah, and I would say, Upstate is basically mirroring those comments on, price per square foot, 460, 465, 480, in that range. Very consistent.
Right.
All right, good deal. Thank you. And we'll come back and talk about the individual markets in a minute. Let's move to the next property type, and that's office. So Sarah, if you'll scroll down, and let's go in the same order, if we will.
Sure. So this is Peter Fennelly. So again, if I feel like I'm repeating myself, first quarter was great. 2019 was great. We come into the, we're first quarter, we're having all sorts of showings, all sorts of activity. And during the second quarter, during the COVID, obviously it was very restrictive about showing buildings, and you didn't really show buildings, but I mean, the phone was not ringing. You couldn't even catch anything at that period. So it was very challenging for the office market. The dilemma for those who own office buildings was very challenging. You had to be patient and stay the course. You had to work with your tenants and do all those things to keep everything going. And plus you had to improve, as you were maybe not achieving the rents that you achieved or the cash flows, you still had to improve the cleanliness and keeping the asset at a really high level because of COVID and those the necessities that we're in. But all that being considered, in our market, at least just in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've seen a spike. We've seen a spike of people, not a spike in Corona, but we've seen a spike of people coming back to the market, coming back and asking for tours and showings and things like that. And we're we're on the midst, we feel like we're on the cusp of having a series of really good activity in our market for the office market. It was very challenging during the second quarter, but we feel like we're at the end of the tunnel and the light is coming through.
Good deal, David.
Yeah, so everyone knows that Columbia, government town, our office market tends to be not to ride the really high peaks, nor does it ride the really low points. And so we've been envious of what happens in Charleston over the last couple of years because of their activity. Columbia had done very well over the last year. We had hit a vacancy rate overall in the market of just under 9%, all classifications of buildings. We saw some really healthy rent increases over the last 12 months, and particularly space that was on the market. They were asking significantly more for that vacant space than building owners were asking a year ago. When COVID hit, the activity just stopped completely. We went from negotiating 5, 7, and 10-year deals to many tenants who said, I just need to stay in place, hold tight. Can I have a 1-year lease? Can I have a 6-month extension until we can figure this out? We're starting to see more activity now. I think, as Peter and I talked yesterday, Charleston tends to be probably a couple of weeks ahead of us on that activity scale. They got kind of back open and got more active a little bit sooner than Columbia did. We're starting to see good activity. We think there'll be a pent-up demand. We think that office actually presents one of the biggest dilemmas out there because the range of thoughts on office market could be from companies that want to work remotely, how do they do that, to companies that want to be partially occupied and partial to remote. And even some companies are out there saying they may have to take more office space in the future to attract and retain employees, and they're going to have to spread those employees out a lot more. I personally think the days of the really high dense operations, those are really declining fast, and the companies that were trying to put 6 and 7 and 8 per thousand in call centers in various locations, yeah, I'm gonna say that we're gonna see a really sharp decline on that, and those companies are gonna have to provide more space for their employees. But overall, activity will come back. It's just, when does it come back? Is it in 4 months, 6 months, or does it take a year? But I think overall, sooner or later, I think we gravitate back towards kind of the markets that we were experiencing about 4 months ago.
Yeah, and I would say from very similar to what Peter and David said, the office market pre-COVID was, again, very similar to industrial. You had record rental rates, record low vacancy, strong absorption. Again, a strong market in total. COVID-19 emerged, and basically people went home. They didn't stay in the office, so that's that was kind of a new thing for a lot of people. Some people like it more than others. It'll be interesting to talk about later in the call, but but what we saw is similar to what David said. Is some companies were saying, we're not going to renew right now. We're just going to let our lease expire. And even some nonprofits were like, we'll just work from home and, wait for the dust to settle, and then we'll come back and see what that looks like. Similar to what, David said, some companies will use more square footage to accommodate social distancing. And some will use less, because of the work from home initiative. I think it's too early to say, what that looks like going forward. You got companies like Microsoft saying that they're going to increase their 150 square feet per person to 300 square feet per person, across some of their portfolio. So, and I think that'll counterbalance, some of the, work from home initiatives that, people are, talking about and experiencing. A lot of people are focused on cleaning and disinfecting buildings, and, a lot of conversation going on about that and what's safe, what's not safe, and who's going to be the first one to the, clean certified building, so to speak. So there's a lot of, discussions going on about that. So, but, that will cause an increase in, janitorial spec, which will increase operating expenses. It's hard to say right now how much that'll be, but on the flip side of that, the office market is is experiencing some, demand decrease. which will make rates go down and supply increase, Econ 101. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But, really since Q1 2016, we've had over 1 million square feet absorbed in the Upstate, with 59% of that being in the suburban market. So, and the other thing we're seeing too is that subleasing activity is starting to pick up.
Yeah. And Steve and Peter, I think we all had hoped and thought that we would have been quarantined for a couple of weeks and then everybody goes back to their office. But I'm curious about Greenville and Charleston, but the larger and the more corporate entity that are out there, they're pushing that out now. We were hearing that they weren't coming back till August and September. Now we're hearing that a lot of those entities are saying, we're not coming back this year. We're coming back in December, January, February of next year.
Right.
And so this is going to be a really slow, long play to see how this works itself out.
I would just say real quick, CBRE has not opened their offices yet. And, we're looking at, the numbers every day like everybody else is and just trying to figure out, but we were on course to open up at the beginning of June. And then we had a big spike in the numbers, not only in Greenville, but, statewide. So we kind of hit the pause button. I would say for the most part, everybody's ready to get back to the office. Again, a plug for, the office building and, have an office space. But I think people also understand that, it's going to be that everybody wants to be cautious. Everybody wants to be safe in that regard. So, it's hard for us to say when we're going to be back. But, I know people want to get back.
Yeah, it's the same here in Charleston. Predominantly, either large multinationals, large nationals, they have a certain set of protocols that they're following, which is for good reason. And then some of the smaller businesses and activities are happening that are different. So some people are in their offices, some are not. So, but it makes one think about, like, the further you get away from being in an office, the further will you ever need that office again? That's a quandary. And will that impact us from an office perspective on relative to vacancy or occupancy? I'm on the betting side that in our region, the state of South Carolina, we're going to be beneficiaries because we have lower rise buildings. We have, more people are looking at the South or Southeast region to come to. I mean, I get calls every day, people saying, hey, do you know anybody who's selling their house? And, and there's people coming out of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut.
Hey, one question I had in the office space. So you talked about the spec that goes on in the industrial space. Were there projects in the office space because we were at low vacancy and rents were going up? Were there any speculative projects that you've seen get postponed or delayed in your markets in the office space because of what's going on?
I would say, I know Peter's probably got more product than anybody in his market, but, from Greenville's standpoint in the Upstate, Camperdown, which is a big mixed use product in the heart of downtown Greenville, started out life as a spec building, 180,000 square feet, but quickly got absorbed. And now there's only, 20,000 square feet left. And it'll deliver probably at the end of the second quarter, actually end of the third quarter. So anyway, more to come on that.
In Charleston, there's 5 there's 5 projects downtown. 2 were going post-COVID and they're moving along pretty quickly. They keep continuing moving. 3 were announced and all 3 of them started site work during the COVID, in the March. They said, we're going no matter what. And some of them are driving, they're putting in their footings now and they're moving forward. They said, if we're going to go, we're going to go. We're all going to come out of this. So they're taking that position. So there's going to be 5 new speculative office buildings in the downtown region of Charleston over the next, 6 to 12 months.
And this is where I'm glad Columbia is a little bit slower in that pace because we didn't have any major new starts. We had a lot of smaller construction taking place, but If we come out of COVID-19 and accelerate from an office standpoint, then our market's going to be really tight, and we're going to see rates push up. My fear is that we'll see a lot of sublease space out there as some firms try to trim down. But I'm really glad that we don't have new construction taking place right now, because we'll need a period to try to recover, and then we'll see some markets really pop. And I think it was Steve who said it, we will see operating expenses go up in all of our buildings, or smart landlords who are preparing their buildings during this COVID-19. It's going to be more costly to operate buildings in the future because of all the necessary precautions that will be taken even after COVID-19. And so I think across the board, there's going to be some increases in rents coming probably in all of our markets.
Good deal. All right, let's move to the next section, the retail property type. So Peter, we'll start with you.
Sure. So again, same story, great activity in the first quarter coming last year. A lot of food and bev activity, lots of new restaurants, all that scene. And really that industry was really severely compressed. And we're a high tourist town, and it took a pretty heavy impact on us. Restaurants are coming, people still operate. Some of the smaller format restaurants kept operating, did pick up and delivery and work through it. Some businesses have closed and will never come back. They've already said we're not going to open up, and they've pulled the plug on their operation. I think those that are operating are being supported well by the community. And I think those, the smaller format operators, I think we're going to struggle, just as everybody else will. The movie theaters, the large formats, restaurants, the large format things, except for groceries and hardware stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, they're all doing well. But all that being considered, we have a lot of people planning retail in the future, and it's really challenging because we're struggling with the junior boxes really and the retail stores. But the belief is that, and we're working in some of these communities where people are laying out these really nice retail formats, but the focus is going to be, they use the saying food, fitness, and fun. So you have to find formats that are going to be acceptable post-COVID, but also the desire to create a different type of retail experience. It's not just about, a soft goods selling clothes and things like that. It has to be something different. But we're optimistic. We're trying to remain optimistic about retail, but that's one of the sectors that are still struggling at this point.
All right, David.
Yeah, if you're in any other product type, you want to take notes and watch what happens to the retail and retail brokers over the next year or two, because there's going to be some massive changes. But a point is that retail is always an evolving product type. Rox Pollard reminds me of how retail has evolved over the last 15 to 20 years in going from enclosed malls to power centers to lifestyle centers. Retail will have a strong comeback, and Steve's hit it. It's an experience. People want to go experience that retail, and they may go shop there and they may go look at things, and then they may go order online, but they've got to walk physically into a store. Restaurants will look different. Retail stores will look different. There's going to be a huge wave of rebuilding retail. It's not going to be for the faint of heart. It's going to take a while, but retail will come back. If you see, the numbers that I post right there, retail is doing very well in Midlands of South Carolina. Our core space was down below 4% vacant. Our inline shop space, the non-core space, was only a 10% vacancy. And we saw a lot of new retailers coming to the market and a lot of new startups that are out there. So retail will go through an extended period of some probably steep vacancies coming up, but retail will come back. It's just how long will it take and what's it going to look like? And I said, you take notes, in 2 and 3 years from now, you look back and watch the evolution of retail. For a lot of people, it's going to be really fun, and some people are going to make a lot of money off of it, trying to be involved in that retail. For others, they're just going to scratch their head and say, what do I do? But it's going to be challenging for a while, but retail will be there.
Yeah, I agree with that, David. And, you know, when you look at, you know, pre-COVID, the retail market was good. You know, again, vacancies were low, rents were increasing. You know, I think in downtown Greenville, you know, a $40 per square foot number I heard on several deals, which is hard to believe in these days and times. But I think from a, you know, every project I have listed on this slide basically has mixed use component with it, which means, you know, whether it's a live, work, play kind of scenario or food, fitness, and fun, like Peter talked about, those are the projects of the future that will succeed and do well. You know, and David also mentioned some big boxes probably coming back, and we'll probably see some adaptive reuse of those big boxes, whether it's, you know, call centers, office space, you know, talking about the parking ratios and the, you know, the densification of that. But, you know, I got to call out the breweries. It's hard for me to imagine how many breweries there are between our three markets. You know, I know in Greenville, there's a bunch of them, and certainly in Charleston and Columbia, but, you know, but they continue to do well. You know, in the grocery anchored centers, at least the grocers are doing well. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see with Del Hayes Food Line acquiring 62 bylaws, you know, 20 of which are in South Carolina, and mostly in, you know, the Upstate and in the Midlands. You know, that's a pretty big acquisition for somebody, you know, in the grocer space. So it'll be interesting to see how they, you know, the landlords that have those, you know, centers, those former bylaws, soon to be food lines, they'll certainly reap, you know, obviously a better credit rating with Del Hayes and Southeastern Grocers. And so those landlords got to be pretty pleased with that acquisition.
Let me ask you a question. In all your markets, is retail the space where you have tenants come to you for abatements the most? Is retail that space? Is it office? And what sort of requests are you seeing from either restaurants or inline retail? And we'll go to Peter. We'll start with you.
Again, retail has its challenges, and, you know, if people were given abatement, which there were, it was probably the largest group. And some people just can't survive, so they didn't even ask for it. They said we're out. But that's probably the most of it, and it varies from situation to situation. We had a bit in office and a bit industrial, but nothing to the extent that you would think. It was probably in our portfolios. It was probably, you know, between 3 to 5% of people that were requesting, and most people kind of were able to get through that position, and particularly in the office and industrial.
David?
Ed, we as soon as the quarantine hit, we saw kind of a massive outcry from the retailers saying, I can't pay rent, or I need rent deferral, or I need rent abatement, or I need help. Just help me, because they'd shut down. And we saw a lot of requests and a lot of letters coming in. We at Colliers, we put together a process and an application for tenants to file with the owner a request, and tried to legitimize it. And we wanted background information. We wanted what their sales had been pre-COVID, what their sales were during that time. And we started getting some of those back, but about that same time, the PPP hit. And a lot of the retailers turned their attention to getting the PPP funds in hand and being able to utilize those. And it tended to stem the tide of the request. So what we thought was going to be just a massive onslaught of these requests, it really slowed down and became more legitimate requests. And some of the tenants put together some really good business plans of here's how they were going to operate going forward, and here's why they were requesting rent relief. From my perspective, the landlords and owners that did provide some assistance, almost across the board, it was deferring rent for a couple of months, a couple being 2, maybe a third month, but that rent was either amortized over the remaining lease term, or that rent was added on to additional term in the end. It wasn't just a free month's rent and no exchange, something coming back from the tenant. So some tenants really needed it, but most turned their attention to the PPP funds. I think the biggest question is what happens in July and August as those PPP funds are used up. And if those tenants are still not operating at full capacity, which we doubt they will be, particularly restaurants, there may be a second wave of those requests coming in.
Thank you. Steve, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very similar story. We had, a number of more retail than office tenants asking for, the first request was free rent. We didn't give anybody free rent. We either did deferred rent, like David said, or, put it on the back end of the, the term, extended the term out, those kind of things. On the office side, it was, pretty, the requests weren't as numerous as retail. But I think, from a go forward standpoint, we'll see, one of the encouraging things I saw, I was on a call earlier today, and, one of our retail brokers are saying all the tenants this month have paid their rent, paid it on time, which is a good sign, and I think we mentioned earlier, if we haven't already, that, retail sales are up 18% in May, which is an encouraging statistic. Of course, they went down pretty low. So, but it'll be interesting to see, how it will play out in the future.
All right, good deal. All right, Sarah, let's move to the next piece, and it's the impact and the opportunities that you've seen. And Peter, we'll start with you.
Sure. So with every, there's always two sides to a story, right? And there are some positive things that will probably that will come out of this COVID experience. One is our ability to communicate over the computer, right? Using all the technology tools and getting the whole broad spectrum of the young people and the millennials and the people in that are in his panel, right? So
the old people.
The old people. So we're all learning how to use the tools and learning how to adapt to this. And really, this is about adaptation. I think the evolution of what we're going through will draw a lot of positives about how we view the world, how we view space. It makes us think, makes us act, and not just level playing field all through it. We have to be creative. We have to be aggressive, and we have to be ready to move left or right. And this is part of life. So it's an experience that we're all going to go through, and there's a positive aspect of being forced to do things, right? Another thing that's occurring in our market, at least, and I'm sure it's from the other markets, is that we are seeing this impact of people choosing to move during this period of time to South Carolina. I mean, I think there is a wave of population, underlying wave of population that is moving to here as well as to other parts of the South, and that's supporting our housing prices, or supporting our housing inventory, supporting all our businesses, right? And that's helpful because that will help us come out of this event in a like a slingshot fashion. So that's the optimism that we're hoping to bring through this. Going back to the retail topic as well, is I think that adaptation of brokers and spaces, we're seeing retail people, brokers promote their spaces as office space or medical office space, or finding other uses. And I've been in some of those spaces, and they're actually done really well and creative. And I think there's an opportunity for everything to be repurposed in different ways. You just got to find the right niche and hire the people to market it and be creative. So I think there's a lot of positivity that we can come out of this.
David?
Gosh, I've waited 33 years to be able to say this. I am really, really glad I'm in South Carolina in a tertiary market.
Amen.
I know we got a couple of brokers from Charlotte on this call, and they're even watching what's happening in South Carolina. I think of Charlotte as a big city, and we'll go through some big city problems. But to be in a tertiary market in the Southeast and have great economic development, have great the Chamber of Commerce and what you stand for, I think, and listen, don't go back a year from now and look at this tape and prove I'm wrong, but this is a speed bump. This is a speed bump period. And in commercial real estate, we will get through it in South Carolina, and we're going to come out a lot better because we're going to see the relocations that Peter talked about. We're going to see people that want to live in the South coming from New England, coming from the larger cities. We're going to see companies that do not want to deal with mass transit in larger markets, and they'll look at smaller operations around the country in tertiary markets. And so we're coming up on a period of time that after we get through all the quarantine and after things start to settle down, I think we're going to see South Carolina really excel in all of these property types. And I think we're going to do very well in the next few years. So really glad that all of us are in this location at this time. It's our time to shine coming up.
Yeah, and I would echo that too. That sometimes I think we all take it for granted that we live in such a great place. Not only a great environment to live, but also a great environment to work. And I think, we in South Carolina need to be proud of what we have. And I can see why people from up north are, wanting to migrate south. So I do think we'll see more of that. Going back to my comment earlier about, Greenville catching up on the industrial side from a square footage standpoint, they just announced yesterday Fox Hill Business Park down in South Greenville County, which is going to be 172 acres, 2.5 million square feet of industrial space planned, putting up a new 206,000 square foot building. So again, more industrial good news. And I think, we're going to see continued e-commerce growth in the South, and especially in South Carolina. And I think we'll see, just continued, migration to this state and to this area. And I think, overall, I think our economy will get back. One thing CB talks about is, right now we're at, I think it's an 18% unemployment rate nationwide. We're expecting to be at 12% by the end of the year, which is still high compared to 2.5 to 3% where we were pre-COVID. So that's hard to believe that it's gone up that high. But anyway, so I mean, there's going to be a lot of opportunities, in all the sectors, and we're just going to have to figure out how, on the retail side especially, we're just going to have to figure out, how to whether it's adaptive reuse or using spaces differently, going forward.
Good deal. Sarah, what's the next slide?
Questions.
I think it's questions. That's what I was thinking. All right. So here's how we're going to do questions. So I actually see a couple questions down there that I'll click on. And so the first question we'll start with here. And then if you have a question, raise your hand and Sarah will unmute you and will allow you to ask the question. But the first question is, what are the current triple net rates for office space in Greenville and Columbia? And then let's do Charleston as well. So we talked about the industrial space. What about office space in the three markets? Peter, we'll start with you in Charleston.
So if I take it back to triple net, but on the full service side is roughly on average in suburban markets about $30, which a conversion back to triple net is roughly $19 to $20 triple net on the office. Downtown we're heading toward we were cresting up into the $40 to $43 rent on a full service. So our net rents are probably closer to $28 to $29 triple net.
All right, David, we'll go to you next.
Yes, Charleston is the highest price market in the state, and everybody knows that. Office in Columbia, CBD, if we say we're averaging $21 to $23 a square foot, OPEX on that is roughly $850 to $950 a square foot, depending on if you got parking, security, and things like that. So if you do the math there, that puts you at about $14, $50, $15 on the triple net. Suburban is about $19 or $20, maybe $21 a square foot. Full service operating expenses are a little bit lower. We'll call that at about $8, $7.50 to $8. So that'll put your triple nets at around $13 a square foot.
Yeah, in the upstate, in downtown Greenville, you've got probably the high water mark is about $32 a foot full service, which is about $23 to $24 net, triple net. And for, Class A, not brand new Class A, but for Class A downtown, you're probably looking at $27 to $28 a square foot. Again, $20 to $19 on a triple net basis. In the suburbs, we're probably $25 per square foot on, top of the market kind of space. So that'll bring you probably about an $8 operating expense number. So you're probably looking at $17, triple net. So very healthy markets.
All right, and then Paul Hartley has a question out there. He's talking about construction prices, and he talks about what are you seeing from a commercial construction pricing on recent projects? Are they, because of COVID, or are costs going up or down? I know with the trade and tariff fight, we've heard folks talk about what that may have done. So Peter, you have any thoughts on costs from?
We've been pricing jobs all through the COVID, and you know, again, we were having inflation and construction pricing throughout the region, throughout the whole country. We've seen some competitive bids come back on pricing projects. It's been a slight movement down, but it's not 10% or 20% down. But I think you know, different people in the process of bidding projects have been more competitive in the anticipation that their pipeline might be impacted. But you know, I think the construction teams out there have been still remained busy in both the residential and the commercial side. So my prediction is that whatever stability that we had in pricing pre-COVID is probably be fairly consistent in our market.
David?
Yeah, I agree with that. If anyone was fortunate enough to be bidding a job right when COVID hit, you saw pretty aggressive bids because a lot of projects were being postponed. But that was really a short window, and I think here very soon you're going, both from tenant improvement standpoint, Paul Hartley from a TI standpoint, we're going to go back to the high price TIs that are out there. And then from a large scale construction, you might see more aggressive pricing in the next few months. But if construction ramps back up and these projects that were postponed, if they come back, I think you're going to see some hefty increases in construction because that pent up pipeline is going to be out there and people are going to start construction all at the same time.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too, that prices were crazy high going into pre-COVID. And I think as David said, as projects get unleashed, so to speak, and put back in play, I think you're going to see more of the same. And I think, you know, I don't really see construction prices going down. And really the big number is the cost of labor. You know, and there's right now, at least there's plenty of labor out there. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how that affects the construction pricing.
Good deal. Next question's from Henry Rowe. Lockwood, you might recognize that name. He's asking from an office perspective, you know, what kind of rental rates do you need to see in order for people to start speccing an office building? And what cost per square foot to build a Class A office building are you looking at if you buy land and build in each of the markets?
You want me to answer that first?
Yeah, start with you, Peter.
So you know, the cost of building and the cost of rents a lot of times are reflective of your willingness to accept a certain yield on your money. And what we've historically seen is that people are willing to build for, like they say, it's a 9% yield and sell it at 7%, so you get 200 basis points in there. But the conversion in the simplistic side is if you're at $20 net and the building costs $250 a foot, there's a kind of a go signal for that. And the belief is that potentially you should be able to sell that building for $300 a foot. And that's what, those are real numbers, like total development cost to build a building right now in our suburban markets, $250+ a foot. And that's, you know, so you have to have a rent threshold to justify moving forward. And you also have to have a personal belief system that it's going to continue to move forward over time.
Yeah, and you know, Peter says something really important about the suburban market. I'm going to try to answer Henry's question because we talk a lot about this at Colliers with Henry and others, and that is, I'm talking about Columbia. You know, we're now seeing this shift where high dense areas are not in vogue. And so does the market begin to shift and push the office markets back to the suburban area, or at least for Columbia? And those of you know Columbia, you know that we've got two areas of Columbia, downtown Columbia. We've got the Main Street district, which means towers and parking garages. And then you've got that peripheral where we've got a bunch of 4- and 6-story buildings. And we've got Bull Street development. We've got a Hugie Street with some office stock over there. I think we're, if it's going to be a while before we see new construction in Columbia, but we will eventually see it. Our rents have to really increase to justify it. But what we'll see are probably medium-sized buildings that are built where parking is in close proximity to the building, surface parking around it. That would be in the Hugie Street, Bull Street area or other areas, but not in the Main Street district. I think it's going to be a while for Columbia before we see that $350 a square foot office tower that comes up and because they're going to struggle finding parking. So we'll see what looks like suburban buildings eventually being built in downtown Columbia, just not in the Main Street area. But I think we're headed back to seeing some activity in the suburbs from some companies who don't want to be downtown and don't want to be and have the density that a lot of people have downtown.
Yeah, and I would just say from a rate standpoint, if you look at downtown Greenville, for a site in downtown Greenville, you're looking at roughly $3 to $3.5 million per acre. So when you start throwing those numbers out, and then you looking at construction costs, core and shell, and TIs and all that, north of $200 a foot, that number gets pretty expensive pretty quick. And I think we're going to see more, like we're seeing on the industrial side. I think we'll see more new construction. I don't think we'll see any more speculative construction in the upstate, at least for the near future. Obviously, because of what we talked about today from an office market standpoint, I think people still really need to figure out kind of where we are and where we're going. But I think Peter's right about, certain investors have certain yield thresholds that they want to hit on their money. And, that's really what dictates what they're willing to spend.
Good deal. I don't see another question, but I have a couple of things that I want to touch on before we wrap up here. We're getting close to the top of the hour. One is the conversion of space to residential space. So in the downtowns, I know in Greenville and Columbia and then Charleston, you see conversion of older buildings into residential space. And then as kind of a dovetail off to that into the hospitality space, the hotel space. I know in all three markets you've seen, hotel development that's been occurring downtown. In those two areas, the residential and the hospitality hotel space, what are you seeing in the markets and what do you project for the kind of the near term? Peter, we'll start with you.
Sure. So and there was a point you made about conversions, and the Charleston market had a lot of conversions in the past years, but we don't have as many conversions. Most of our product now is new builds. So we have, between the last year and going forward, we probably have 4,000 new apartment units being delivered downtown, new buildings that are between, 4 and 6 stories tall, and they're being delivered. And it's an interesting time to be delivering product because of the different things going on in COVID, but there is a lot of new product that's being delivered at different price points. And we had a big surge of hotels that came online probably over the last 24, 36 months. And they pretty much, most of them delivered with the, there might be one boutique and then one other one, or the one that's about to start is a super prominent one that's going to be on the waterfront with the old State Ports Authority building is. It's going to be an incredible building by Lowe's, but that will take a few years to come to fruition. But I think that the hotel community got impacted, but it's going to come back in that side. I believe that we'll see all these food groups do well over time, just for the sake of population growth and tourism coming back in a strong way. But I think there is still there's some trepidation going on over the next 6 months as we come to the end of this year, and as people are trying to lease their projects or fill up their projects or hit their ADRs. There's a lot of tension out there that has to be satisfied and contained.
David?
Ed, let me answer that in two ways. One, almost day by day, we're seeing really positive reports come back about hotels that are ramping back up. I still think hotels have a long way to go, but the fact that that we're starting to see those people travel again, and just by driving around in Charleston and Greenville and Columbia, you're starting to see a lot more cars in the hotels. But I think the hotel industry is still in for a little shakeout. with how they operate. So I think school's out on that, but I think eventually it's just a longer path to get back to where they were. The residential component is really a question mark around this area. And when you look out your windows, Ted, we still have student housing projects under construction. And so the Columbia market is impacted by student housing. How many students come back to the University of South Carolina? Where are they living? Are they living in market rate apartments? Are they living in student housing? That's going to have a big impact on the market. But I go back to what we said, what Peter said is we're going to see a really strong migration of people coming to South Carolina. And any of you who are listening on this call, if you talk to residential agents, they will tell you they are flat out busy. They are really busy right now with a lot of out-of-town interest. And I think those people that move to South Carolina, at least for Columbia, they're going to move from a larger city and they're going to become very much suburbanites. They've always dreamed of having a house with a yard and in a community. And I don't think they're going to move to the urban areas of our three cities. I think that they're going to populate in big houses in the suburbs because they got a lot of money and can buy it, or they're going to be on the lakes. And so I see a kind of a decline in the multifamily area in Columbia just because of the student housing impact, and how soft that whole market becomes. And then the people that will go back to buying houses and not want to live in dense places.
Yeah, and I would say too that the conversions we're seeing in the Upstate are mostly old textile mills being converted to, residential, multifamily, and then, some office space incorporated as well. We saw that at Drayton Mills in Spartanburg, a great project that was done that way. And we're seeing it now in Greenville and downtown Greenville at Judson Mill, which is, probably about 450 units of multifamily and, another 150 to 200,000 square feet of office space and some retail. Again, going back to that mixed use component, that's what's gonna. We'll hear more and more of that, in the days, weeks, and years to come, as far as what people want to develop and and place their money.
Good deal. Well, I believe that's all the questions. Is there anything, I'm gonna let each of you kind of close us with some final thoughts. Peter, we'll start with you. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to touch on?
No, I think we covered a lot. And I appreciate you having us on. I appreciate being here and being in South Carolina. I think optimism is in front of us, and part of making all that happen is working together and keeping your eyes open, right?
Yep.
Good deal. David.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I think the most interesting thing is a conversation Peter and Steve and I had yesterday, and all three of us are really aligned in where we think the markets will go. We don't see major flyers out there. We think that we'll all get to the same point, maybe just a little slightly different route, market by market. But again, of any place that we could live, this is where you want to be right now, because I think we'll see very good progress over the next few years.
Yeah, and I would echo that and just say that, again, we live in a great place and we have great partners in, not only the South Carolina Chamber, but, Department of Commerce, all the regional development agencies, alliances around the state, all the economic development agencies, county, city. I mean, we got a great team, so to speak. So, David mentioned that this is a speed bump in time, and I believe that, and I hope it's true. But I think we'll come out of this as we originally thought, but I think we'll come out of it great guns and get where we were.
Well, good deal. Well, I want to thank you guys for taking the time out of your afternoon and sharing this information with our members and those that have dialed in. And we appreciate what you've done. And we'll make sure that if anybody needs your contact information, those that were on the call will share your contact information. And feel free to reach out to these guys individually, and they'll be happy to talk with you. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you, Ted.